My name is Rachel Miller. I'm 29 years old, and on a quiet Sunday night in Plano, Texas, I watched my place in my family get reduced to a joke in less than 10 seconds. Not because I yelled, not because I fought back, but because I walked into the room a few minutes late, carrying a laptop bag, and everyone already thought they knew exactly who I was. It was my mom's birthday, the kind of evening that always looks the same in our house. The TV was on ESPN, volume low, plates stacked on the counter, a grocery store cake sweating slightly under its plastic lid. My dad was in his recliner, half watching the game. My mom was moving back and forth between the kitchen and the table, telling the same story for the third time. It felt normal, comfortable, very American. I arrived just after 7. I had been finishing a video call for work, one of those meetings that runs long because no one wants to be the first to log off. I was still wearing a gray sweater, my laptop backpack slung over one shoulder. No one looked up when I came in. No one asked why I was late. No one moved my chair out. I slipped into my seat and started taking off my bag. That's when my brother Jason laughed. He didn't lower his voice. He didn't look embarrassed. He leaned back in his chair, beer in hand, and said, "Well, at least you've got a reason to leave your bedroom today. Or did your little remote job finally get busy?" A couple people chuckled. Not loudly, just enough to let it land. My mom smiled without looking at me. My dad kept his eyes on the TV. Someone passed the plates like nothing had happened. The moment settled into the room, solid and familiar, like this was just how things worked. I didn't say anything. I set my bag down by my feet and reached for a fork. I'd learned a long time ago that reacting only made it worse. Silence was easier. Silence was expected. Jason took a bite of cake and shook his head, still grinning. "Must be nice," he added, "working from home. No real pressure. No real job." I cut into my food and kept my eyes on my plate. The candles flickered on the cake. The ESPN anchors argued softly in the background. Everything moved on. No one in that room knew how much the house cost each month. No one knew whose account the utilities were paid from. No one knew who had covered the cake, the groceries, the mortgage, the quiet little emergencies that kept our lives running on time. They laughed because it was easy. They laughed because they thought they could. And not a single person at that table knew that I was the one who had paid for the party they were sitting at. In my family, importance was never about who showed up. It was about who needed something. My mom, Linda Miller, was the center of everything. Not loud, not cruel, just constant. She believed her job was to keep the peace, to make sure no one felt uncomfortable for too long. If voices rose, she smoothed them down. If tension appeared, she redirected it. Conflict made her nervous, so she learned how to step around it instead of through it. Over time, that meant protecting the people most likely to cause it. My dad, Robert, used to have opinions. I remember that version of him vaguely. 4 years ago, when he lost his job, something in him went quiet. He didn't say much after that. He stopped weighing in. He let my mom handle decisions, big and small. Money, schedules, problems. He became very good at staying out of the way, like furniture that had always been there and didn't want to be noticed. Jason had always been the one who needed help. Even when we were kids, there was always a reason. He was sensitive. He was stressed. He just needed a little more time. When something went wrong, it was never framed as his fault. It was framed as bad luck, or pressure, or other people not seeing his potential. If he was angry, everyone adjusted. If he was disappointed, everyone paused. Emily, my younger sister, was protected in a different way. She was still young. That word carried a lot of weight in our house. It meant expectations were lower. Mistakes were temporary. Bills were someone else's problem. If she struggled, it was natural. If she succeeded, it was celebrated. Either way, attention followed her. And then there was me. I didn't cause scenes. I paid my bills. I showed up when I said I would. I didn't ask for rides or extensions or explanations. Somewhere along the way, that turned into a quiet agreement no one ever stated out loud. Rachel will be fine. It sounded reassuring at first, like trust, like confidence. But over time, it became a reason not to look too closely. If I wasn't complaining, I must not need anything. If I wasn't struggling, I must not require attention. Stability in our house meant invisibility. When decisions were made, they were rarely about me. Not because anyone disliked me, but because I didn't present a problem to solve. Problems got airtime. Problems got discussions. Problems got concern. I didn't. If Jason needed something, the room shifted toward him. If Emily was overwhelmed, plans adjusted. If I stayed quiet, the assumption was that I preferred it that way. I learned to sit through conversations where my name never came up. Learned to listen while my mom worried out loud about everyone else. Learned that being dependable meant being forgettable. No one told me that directly. They didn't have to. The hierarchy was invisible, but it was consistent. Whoever needed the most was treated as the most important. Whoever seemed okay was expected to stay that way. I understood that logic for a long time. I even defended it. Someone had to be the easy one. Someone had to keep things moving. Someone had to not make it harder. It just took me years to realize what that role was costing me. In my family, the more stable you were, the less you were noticed. And by the time I understood that clearly, everyone had already gotten very comfortable not looking my way at all. There was a version of the story everyone in my family believed, and then there was the one that actually paid the bills. On paper, nothing connected back to me. That was the point. The mortgage didn't come out of a personal checking account with my name on it. It came from Miller Consulting LLC, a quiet line item that showed up each month like clockwork. $2,416, withdrawn on the first business day, every month, no variation. My parents never asked where it came from. They just knew the house stayed ours. Emily's tuition was the same. $1,180 a month, paid directly to the university. No envelopes, no conversations, no drama. My mom liked to say the school had been very flexible, as if flexibility alone explained why the account balance never dipped low enough to scare her. Health insurance was bundled together under a family plan. $642 a month, automatically drafted. My dad once mentioned how lucky they were to have found such a reasonable rate. He said it at dinner, passing the salt, like he was commenting on the weather. Jason's situation was messier. It always was. Over 2 years, there were transfers that didn't fit neatly into categories. Rent when he was late, credit card payments when the interest started compounding, groceries, gas, small emergencies that never stayed small. When I finally added it up, the total came to $18,740. I didn't announce that number. I didn't even write it down right away. I just kept covering it, one payment at a time. No one ever saw my name attached to any of it. That wasn't an accident. The account was set up to look like business income. Clean, neutral, impersonal. If anyone glanced to the statement, it told them nothing. And they rarely glanced. Things worked. That was enough. In my family, money didn't come from people. It came from figuring things out. That phrase did a lot of work. Whenever something got paid, it meant someone had figured it out. Whenever a problem disappeared, it meant it had resolved itself. No one asked how. Asking would have meant acknowledging dependence, and dependence made people uncomfortable. So the story stayed simple. My parents believed they were managing. Jason believed he was getting back on his feet. Emily believed her loans were being handled in the background. And I let all of them believe that. From the outside, it probably looked like I was the one drifting. I didn't talk about promotions. I didn't mention income. I didn't correct anyone when they joked about my little consulting thing. I showed up with leftovers. I wore the same coat for years. I drove a car that never drew attention. It fit the version of me they were already comfortable with. They thought I lived lightly because I had to. They thought I stayed quiet because I didn't have much to say. They thought I benefited from the family's safety net the same way everyone else did. What they didn't see was that the net only held because someone kept tightening it from underneath. I never sat them down. I never explained. I never wanted credit. I told myself I was doing it because it was easier, because it kept the peace, because someone had to be responsible. But the truth was simpler and harder to admit. If I didn't make myself essential, I would disappear entirely. They thought I was surviving because of the family. In reality, the family was surviving because of me. I didn't choose silence because I was afraid. I chose it because, at the time, it seemed like the only way to keep things from breaking. 4 years ago, my dad lost his job. It wasn't dramatic. There was no shouting, no slammed doors. He came home earlier than usual one afternoon and sat at the kitchen table with his jacket still on. The TV was off. My mom stood at the sink, washing the same mug twice. They spoke in low voices, the way people do when they don't want the walls to hear. I was standing in the hallway, pretending to look at my phone. Later that night, after my dad had gone to bed, my mom came into my room. She closed the door behind her, which already told me this wasn't a normal conversation. She sat on the edge of my bed and folded her hands together like she was about to pray. "Don't say anything," she said. Not angrily, not urgently, just firmly. "We don't need more pressure right now." She didn't ask if I could help. She didn't explain what that help might look like. She just assumed I understood. And I did. The next month, I covered the mortgage, quietly. The month after that, I did it again. When Emily's tuition bill came due and my mom's voice got tight on the phone, I paid that too. When Jason called about a credit card he'd almost handled, I sent the money without asking questions. Nothing was ever discussed. That became the rule. I didn't announce the payments. My mom didn't thank me. My dad didn't acknowledge it. The money appeared, and everyone moved on. That was the agreement, even if no one ever called it that. I paid, they kept their dignity, and no one had to feel uncomfortable. Silence made it possible. If I had spoken up, someone would have felt embarrassed. If I had explained, someone would have felt small. My mom would have worried about appearances. My dad would have retreated further. Jason would have bristled. Emily would have felt guilty for something she didn't create. So I stayed quiet. Not because I was weak, but because I was practical. It's easy to misunderstand that kind of silence. From the outside, it looks like submission, like someone being taken advantage of. But from the inside, it feels more like control. I knew exactly what I was doing. I knew what it cost. I just decided, at the time, that the cost was worth it. Silence let my parents believe they were still standing on their own. It let Jason believe he was just going through a rough patch. It let Emily focus on school instead of bills. It kept the family story intact. And it kept me out of it. No one had to look at me differently. No one had to adjust their view of who mattered or who carried weight. I remained what I had always been, the steady one, the background one, the one who didn't need anything. That role came with a strange kind of safety. As long as I didn't speak, nothing shifted. No one questioned their assumptions. No one felt threatened. The system worked. Until it didn't. For a long time, I told myself I was choosing peace. I told myself this wasn't sacrifice, just timing. That one day, when things were better, it might make sense to talk about it. But years passed, and silence stopped being a temporary solution and turned into an expectation. My silence wasn't about martyrdom. It wasn't about being noble. It was about containment. My silence wasn't a sacrifice. It was how I kept everything from falling apart. The first time I felt the ground shift wasn't loud. It didn't happen during an argument or a crisis. It came wrapped in a casual request, delivered like it was already decided. Jason brought it up on a Tuesday afternoon. He called while I was between meetings, his voice unusually upbeat. He said he'd found something promising, a fresh start, a chance to get back out there. He paused, just long enough for me to lean in. "It's a car," he said. "Nothing crazy, just something reliable." I asked how much. 32, he said quickly. 1,000. But it's an investment. I need it for interviews. First impressions matter. I didn't respond right away. I pictured the car he was talking about. New enough to smell clean, shiny enough to feel like progress. I also pictured the credit cards I'd already paid down, the rent I'd quietly covered, the pattern. Later that night, my mom called. She didn't waste time. She never did when she thought something mattered. She talked fast, like if she slowed down she might hear herself too clearly. "You understand your brother," she said. "He's been having a hard time. This could really help him." I didn't interrupt. I let her keep going. "If we don't support him now," she added, "he's going to fall apart." That was the sentence that landed. Not because it was dramatic, but because it made something very clear. Helping Jason wasn't a choice. It was an obligation. And the consequences of saying no had already been assigned. I sat on the edge of my bed with my phone pressed to my ear, staring at the same spot on the wall I'd stared at for years. I could feel the familiar pull, the quiet expectations settling in place. I could almost hear the next steps lining themselves up. Transfer the money, make it disappear, keep everything smooth. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I said nothing. My mom waited a beat, then filled the silence herself. She talked about how much pressure Jason was under, how hard it was out there, how this wasn't about luxury, just stability. She reminded me that family shows up when it counts. I let her finish. Then I told her I had to go. Another meeting, another excuse, another clean exit. When the call ended, I stayed where I was. I didn't move. I didn't open my laptop. I just sat there, listening to the quiet. For the first time, I didn't feel generous. I didn't feel responsible. I felt something else. A kind of clarity that made my chest tighten. They didn't need my advice. They didn't want my opinion. They didn't even need my agreement. They needed my silence. They needed me to keep absorbing the impact, so nothing else had to change. That was the moment the role I'd been playing finally showed its edges. Not the steady one, not the dependable one. The invisible buffer, the thing that softened every landing so no one else had to. I realized then that my value in the family wasn't tied to who I was. It was tied to what I prevented. Debt, conflict, consequences. And as long as I stayed quiet, I would keep preventing all of it. I didn't make a decision that night. I didn't draw a line or issue a warning. I just didn't respond. And for the first time, that silence didn't feel like protection. It felt like a question. And I knew that whatever came next would depend on whether I kept answering it the same way I always had. I didn't make the decision in a rush. There was no breaking point, no dramatic moment where everything spilled over. It happened the way most real decisions do, quietly, in between ordinary tasks, when no one else was watching. The next morning, I logged into my bank account before work. The screen looked the same as it always had. Balances, dates, scheduled payments lined up neatly, waiting their turn. I stared at the mortgage autopay for a long time. $2,416, set to withdraw in 3 days. It had been there for years, so familiar I barely noticed it anymore. I clicked into the details, scrolled, read every line, even though I already knew them by heart. Then I picked up the phone. The woman at the bank spoke calmly, the way people do when this is just another call on their list. She asked for verification. I answered. She asked what I wanted to change. I need to stop an automatic payment, I said. She didn't ask why. She just explained the process. I listened. I confirmed. I thanked her. When the call ended, the payment was gone. The line disappeared from the schedule like it had never been there. I didn't feel relieved. I didn't feel guilty. I felt steady. Later that afternoon, between meetings, I called the university's billing office, Emily's school. I had the account number saved in my notes app. I'd used it often enough. The woman on the other end sounded tired. I imagined stacks of paperwork around her desk. I told her I needed to pause upcoming tuition payments. Not cancel, just pause. She explained deadlines, consequences, late notices. I said I understood. When the call ended, I closed my laptop and sat back in my chair. The apartment was quiet. No TV, no music, just the hum of the refrigerator and the sound of traffic outside. That was it. I didn't call my mom. I didn't text Jason. I didn't warn anyone or soften the landing. Not because I wanted them to panic, but because explaining would have turned it into a debate. And debates in my family were never about solutions. They were about pressure. I wasn't interested in pressure anymore. This wasn't punishment. I wasn't trying to teach anyone a lesson. I wasn't waiting for someone to come crawling back. I simply stopped doing the things I had quietly taken on without ever being asked. For the first time, I allowed the system to run without me. The days that followed felt strangely normal. I went to work, I answered emails, I cooked dinner. No one called. No one noticed. That part didn't surprise me. What surprised me was how calm I felt. I had expected anxiety, guilt, second-guessing. Instead, there was a kind of clarity that settled in my chest, like I had finally set something down I'd been carrying so long I'd forgotten it was heavy. I thought about all the times I'd told myself this was temporary. All the months I'd said, just until things stabilize, just until he finds work, just until she graduates. There was always a next condition, always another reason to wait. Stopping didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like honesty. I didn't announce the change because I didn't want credit, and I didn't want conflict. I wanted truth. And the truth didn't need an audience. If anyone asked, I would answer. But I wasn't going to explain myself in advance, just to make the impact smaller. For years, my silence had held everything together. This time, my silence meant stepping back. And I knew that once I did, there was no way to pretend I hadn't. The consequences didn't arrive all at once. They came the way mail always does. Quietly, one envelope at a time. My mom was the first to notice something was wrong. She called me early one morning, her voice tight and rushed. She said a letter had come from the bank. She kept using the word confusing, like that might make it less real. They say there was a missed payment, she told me. That can't be right. We've never missed one. I listened. I didn't interrupt. I could hear papers shuffling on her end, the faint echo of her pacing across the kitchen floor. It must be a mistake, she said. I'm going to call them back. She hung up without waiting for my response. A few hours later, Emily texted. Just one line at first. Are you busy? When I called her, she was already crying. Not loudly, just the quiet kind, the kind that sounds like someone trying not to make a mess. She'd gotten an email from the university's billing office. Her account showed a balance. There was a deadline, a late fee warning, words she'd never had to pay attention to before. I don't understand, she said. Mom said everything was handled. I told her to breathe. I told her to talk to the office. I didn't explain anything else. Jason found out last. He didn't ease into it. He never did. He called in the middle of the afternoon, his voice sharp before I even said hello. My card got declined, he said. Twice. He accused the bank first, then the credit company, then the cashier, like it was personal. By the time he reached me, his frustration had nowhere left to go. This is ridiculous, he snapped. I need that card. I've got things lined up. I asked what the balance was. He didn't answer. He just kept talking, faster now, about bad timing, about how nothing ever worked out when it mattered, about how this wasn't fair. Not once did he ask if I knew what was happening. Not once did my mom or Emily or Jason say my name in a way that suggested suspicion. They were confused, alarmed, angry, but they weren't connecting the dots. In their minds, money problems came from outside forces, banks, systems, bad luck, not me. I was too quiet for that, too ordinary, too easy to overlook. They called each other, compared notes, tried to piece together a version of events that made sense without changing their assumptions. My mom talked about calling a lawyer. My dad suggested refinancing. Emily panicked about her classes. Jason ranted about how the world was stacked against him. I listened from a distance. No one asked me to fix it. Not yet. No one even considered that I might be part of the equation. The idea simply didn't fit the version of me they carried around. I was the one who worked from home, the one with no real pressure, the one who always seemed fine. In their eyes, I wasn't someone who caused problems. I was someone who benefited from solutions. So they kept scrambling, calling offices, waiting on hold, reassuring each other that things like this happen sometimes, that it would sort itself out. And I let it. I didn't step in to smooth things over. I didn't offer explanations. I didn't rush to restore balance. For the first time, I watched the system wobble without reaching out to steady it. And that was when it became clear just how invisible my role had been all along. They weren't asking where the support had gone. They were asking why the ground suddenly felt unsteady beneath their feet. The truth didn't come out in a dramatic reveal. It surfaced the way it had been hidden, through exhaustion, confusion, and a silence no one knew how to sit with anymore. Jason showed up at my apartment without calling. I knew it was him before I opened the door. He knocked too hard, too fast, the kind of knock that wasn't asking. He didn't wait for an invitation. He stepped inside, pacing the small living room like it had personally offended him. His phone was still in his hand. I could see the banking app open on the screen. "What the hell did you do?" he shouted. I closed the door behind him and leaned against it. I didn't rush. I didn't raise my voice. I'd imagined this moment enough times to know that reacting would only make it smaller. "What do you mean?" I asked. "You know exactly what I mean," he said. "My card's dead. Mom's freaking out. Emily's tuition is suddenly pending. Did you mess something up?" I let the question hang there for a second longer than was comfortable. "I didn't mess anything up," I said. He stared at me, waiting for the rest. When it didn't come, his voice went sharper. "So you're just going to stand there?" I nodded once. I stopped paying. The room went still in a way that felt unnatural, like the air had thickened. "Stopped paying what?" he asked. I didn't list it. I didn't say mortgage or tuition or balances. I didn't need to. I just said, calmly, "I stopped paying for things I wasn't allowed to talk about." That was when my mom called. Jason snatched the phone from my hand before I could answer and put it on speaker. Her voice came through thin and unsteady, like she'd been crying and trying to hide it. "Rachel," she said, "we need to understand what's going on." I stepped closer to the phone. "I understand what's going on," I said. "I've understood it for a while." There was a pause on the line. Then she asked the question carefully, as if saying it too loudly might make it real. "You mean, all this time," she said, It's been you? I didn't answer right away. Yes, I said finally. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy. I could hear my dad breathing on the other end of the line. I could hear my mom swallow. Jason laughed once, sharp and disbelieving. "That's not funny," he said. "You don't make that kind of money." I didn't argue. I didn't pull out statements or explain my job. I didn't correct him. "I wasn't joking," I said. My mom didn't cry. She didn't yell. She just whispered, "Why didn't you say anything?" I thought about all the times she'd asked me to stay quiet. All the times silence had been easier for everyone involved. "Because no one ever asked," I said. No one spoke after that. The quiet stretched long enough to feel uncomfortable. Jason stopped pacing. My mom didn't fill the space the way she usually did. Even my dad stayed silent. It was the first time the truth had nowhere to hide. And for the first time, no one rushed to smooth it over. The argument everyone expected never really happened. There was no shouting match, no slammed doors, no moment where anyone clearly won. What happened instead was quieter and somehow heavier. Jason was the first to break the silence. He stood in the middle of my living room, arms crossed, like he was bracing himself against a version of reality he didn't like. "Family helps each other," he said. His voice was louder now, not angry exactly, but defensive. "That's how it works. You don't just pull the plug and watch everyone scramble." I watched him as he spoke. Not the words themselves, but the way he said them. The certainty. The assumption that the rule had always applied in one direction. "I did help," I said. "For years." "That's not the point," he snapped. "You don't get to decide when it stops." That was when I understood what he was really upset about. Not the money. The loss of control. My mom was still on the phone, quiet now. She hadn't tried to redirect the conversation or soften it the way she usually did. She was listening in a way she hadn't before. Jason shook his head. "You think this makes you better than us?" I didn't answer right away. I wasn't looking for the right words. I was looking for the truth underneath them. "Family isn't supposed to feel like a transaction," he went on. "You don't keep score." I nodded once. "I didn't," I said. "You did. You just didn't realize it." He opened his mouth to argue, but I spoke before he could. "Family isn't a place where one person pays so everyone else can stay comfortable," I said. My voice didn't rise. It didn't shake. "Family isn't where one person absorbs all the pressure so no one else has to feel it." The room went still again. Family is not a place where someone has to disappear to keep the peace. That was when my dad spoke. He hadn't said much all evening. He'd been sitting at the kitchen table, hands folded, staring at the same spot on the wood like it might give him an answer. When he finally looked up, his voice was rough, like he hadn't used it in a while. "I should have stepped in," he said. Not to Jason, not to my mom. To the room itself. I let this go too far. No one responded right away. He cleared his throat. "I knew things were being handled. I just didn't ask how." He paused. That was easier. It wasn't an apology. Not exactly. But it was the first acknowledgement that the system hadn't been accidental. Jason looked between us, his expression shifting. "So what now?" he asked. "You just cut us off?" I shook my head. "No." That surprised him. "I'm not cutting anyone off," I said. "I'm stepping out of a role I was never supposed to have." My mom finally spoke again, her voice quiet. "We didn't mean for it to be like this." "I know," I said, "and I meant it. That was the hardest part, realizing that no one had planned this. It had just grown around us, shaped by convenience and avoidance and silence. But intent didn't change impact. "I'm not asking for gratitude," I said. "I'm not asking to be praised. I just won't keep paying the price for a version of family that only works if I stay quiet." Jason didn't respond. He looked tired now, smaller. No one won that night, but something fundamental shifted. For the first time, the rules were visible. I left the house without saying much after that. There wasn't anything left to explain. The conversation had reached its natural end, and pushing it further would have turned it into something louder than it needed to be. The drive out of the neighborhood was slow. It always was. The same narrow streets, the same mailboxes leaning slightly to one side, the same porch lights flicking on as the sky darkened. Yellow streetlights stretched across the windshield in soft bands, familiar and dull. The radio was on low, playing a song I recognized but couldn't name. Something old, something that had probably been there the last time I drove these roads as a teenager. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel victorious. Mostly, I felt tired in a way that was clean, like the tiredness that comes after finally putting something down. For a long time, I had believed that fairness was something you earned by waiting. That if I stayed quiet long enough, if I kept things running smoothly, eventually someone would notice. Eventually, someone would say, "We see you now. We understand." That moment never came. What did come was something else entirely. I realized that some people only understand your value once you stop carrying what was never meant to be yours alone. As long as I absorbed the weight, there was no reason for anyone else to feel it. The system worked because I made it work. And when I stepped back, the imbalance finally showed itself. I learned that people don't appreciate what they've never had to be responsible for. Not because they're cruel, but because comfort has a way of erasing curiosity. If something is handled, no one asks how. If something doesn't fall apart, no one looks for what's holding it together. Setting boundaries didn't make me selfish. It didn't make me cold. It made things honest. I used to think boundaries were walls, something you built to keep people out. I understand now that they're more like lines on the ground. Quiet ones, clear ones. They don't punish anyone. They just tell the truth. By the time I pulled into my own parking lot, the song on the radio had ended. I sat there for a moment before turning the engine off, listening to the quiet settle in around me. It didn't feel empty. It felt steady. I carried my bag upstairs, unlocked the door, and stepped into my apartment. The light switch clicked on. The room filled with a soft, familiar glow. I closed the door behind me and stood there, alone, for a few seconds longer than necessary. This was what choosing myself looked like. Not dramatic, not loud, just clear. If you've ever been the person who quietly held everything together, the one who paid the bills no one talked about, the one who stayed calm so everyone else could fall apart, I want you to know this. You're not invisible because you don't matter. You're invisible because you made it easy for others not to look. And if you've ever wondered what would happen if you stopped back just enough to let the truth surface, you're not wrong to ask that question. If you've been the one carrying everything in silence, I want to hear your story. Share it, so at least we don't have to be quiet alone.